A young cop punched a 90-year-old veteran, unaware that the man's son, Eli Grayson, was a member of the Hells Angels, the most notorious biker gang in America. That morning, Walter Grayson sat at his usual corner table in Rosie's diner, his wrinkled hands cradling a steaming cup of black coffee. The scent of bacon, fried eggs, and maple syrup mingled in the warm air, creating the familiar aroma of mornings that he, in his old age, considered his last comfort. The small diner seemed frozen in time. Checkered tile floors, red vinyl booths, and a little bell above the door that jingled softly with every entrance. Walter liked that feeling, simple and familiar. At 90, he needed little more than peace. He had survived the Korean War, faced death more times than he could count in his remaining years. After decades of bombs and loss, a quiet breakfast with a hot cup of coffee was all the heaven he needed. "Another cup, Mr. Grayson?" Rosie, the 25-year-old diner owner, asked, holding a coffee pot in one hand while wiping her apron with the other. "Sure thing, Rosie," Walter replied with a smile. The girl, with dark circles under her eyes and the anxious energy of long shifts, poured the coffee and said, "I've had to stay on guard these past few weeks, ever since they started showing up." Walter raised an eyebrow. But before Rosie could answer, the harsh roar of a police car engine sounded from the parking lot, shattering the calm. The rumble echoed through the thin walls, making the silverware on the tables vibrate. Walter didn't need to look outside to know trouble was coming. The door swung open, the bell clanging, and 3 young police officers stepped inside. They walked with the smugness of men who believed the whole town was under their control. Leading them was Officer Rick Miller, about 30, tall, buzz-cut, with sharp eyes and a cold smile. He scanned the diner, his leather boots thudding heavily on the floor, each step a challenge. The warm atmosphere vanished, replaced by tension and wariness. Rosie shrank back behind the counter, and Walter set his coffee down, his old but steady eyes locking onto them. Rick Miller strode to the counter, smirking as he saw Rosie's unease. "Coffee, sweetheart, and try to smile a bit more," he said, his voice half command, half taunt. Rosie tried to stay calm, pouring coffee into a cup, but her hand trembled slightly. Walter watched, setting his cup down, his voice hoarse but clear. "She's not your entertainment, officer." Miller turned, his smile fading, his eyes flashing with defiance. "Oh, old man, what'd you say?" he asked, his tone dripping with mockery. "I said you should learn to respect people," Walter replied, his gaze calm, like someone who'd seen too much of the world. The clatter of silverware in the diner stopped, and everyone watched in silence. A heavy tension settled over the small room. Miller stepped closer, his breath reeking of tobacco, his fist clenched. "You think that old hat gives you the right to lecture me?" he growled. Walter just stared back, unflinching, unafraid. And then, without warning, Miller swung. The sound of fist meeting bone echoed in the cramped space. The coffee cup toppled, shattering, black liquid splashing across the table. Walter fell back, crashing into a chair, his knees buckling to the floor. Blood trickled from his mouth, bright red against the tiles. A scream came from Rosie. A few patrons jumped up, some raising phones to record, but Walter, trembling, pushed himself up, slowly regaining his balance. His face was bruised, but his eyes still burned with pride, locked onto Miller without a word. In that gaze was no fear, only the quiet contempt of a man who'd faced gunfire. The diner fell into absolute silence. No one spoke, no one dared breathe. Loudly, Miller sneered, adjusting his collar, looking around as if nothing had happened. Walter, shaking, pulled his phone from his jacket pocket, his aged fingers trembling as he dialed a familiar number. "Eli, your dad needs you," he said softly, his voice weak but clear. Then he sat back in the chair, blood still dripping onto the floor, his eyes fixed on the window. Less than 10 minutes later, the low, powerful rumble of a Harley-Davidson echoed from the distance, like thunder signaling an approaching storm. The sound grew closer, shaking the diner. A woman whispered, "God, that's a Harley." The door burst open, the bell ringing, and Eli Grayson walked in, tall, rugged, his long hair tied back. He wore a weathered leather jacket with the faded Hells Angels California patch. His sun-weathered face held eyes cold and deep as stone. The smell of gasoline and road dust mixed with the diner's coffee and the metallic tang of blood. He scanned the room, taking only a second to spot his father sitting in the corner, blood staining the white napkin in his hand. Eli walked over, silent, his gaze settling on Miller's face. Not a word, not a wasted movement, just a thick, heavy space between the two men, one wielding false authority, the other carrying real anger. Miller took half a step back, but then sneered. "Oh, a biker? Here to protect the old man?" Eli didn't respond. He stood still, his eyes piercing through the uniform, the kind of look that once made enemies bow on the battlefield. The diner held its breath. The door swung open again, and Sheriff Duke Hollis, the town's police chief, stepped in. "Enough," he said, his voice rough, raising a hand between them. "Miller, get out. Grayson, take your father home." No one said another word. Eli leaned down, gently helping his father up, supporting him as he stood. Walter didn't resist, only gripped his son's hand tightly, his eyes a mix of pride and the shame of being humiliated. As they walked out, Miller called after them, a half smile full of contempt. "Just another biker." Eli paused for half a second, not turning, but his shoulders tensed, his hand clenching. Then he kept walking, guiding his father out, leaving behind a room heavy with the smell of coffee, metal and fear, where everyone knew that, from that moment, Eureka's peace was officially over. That late afternoon, Nevada's sunlight stretched long over the old rooftops, the pale yellow of sunset coating the peeling wooden porch of the house where Walter had lived alone for years. He sat on an old rocking chair, a white bandage wrapped around his cheek, stained with dried blood. Eli was silent in the kitchen, brewing coffee in his father's old pot, the rich aroma of roasted beans filling the small house, blending with the scent of pine from the porch. Neither spoke for a long time, only the creak of the rocking chair and the clink of a spoon against a mug. Eli brought out 2 cups, setting one in front of his father before sitting on a wooden chair beside him. Walter lifted the cup, his hands trembling, his eyes still fixed on the horizon where the sun sank behind the mountains. "I don't want you getting involved in this," he said slowly, his voice hoarse and tired. Eli didn't answer right away, just blew on his coffee, his deep, calm eyes reflecting the evening light. "He punched you in the face," he said, his voice steady, but carrying an undercurrent of fire, and walked away like it was nothing. Walter sighed, turning to his son with a look both stern and loving. "I've seen men like him in the service, guys who think power lets them disrespect others. But war taught me that justice doesn't come from fists, but from how you carry yourself." Eli gave a slight nod, a faint smile crossing his lips. "I know, I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to take back your honor." Walter fell silent, just looking at his son for a long time. Eli's older brother had died in the Gulf War, and Eli, the younger son, had long chosen a different path. No military, no rank, just freedom and 2 wheels. "People call you an outlaw," Walter said, "but today the law itself punched me in the face." Eli tightened his grip on the coffee mug, the heat searing his calloused palm. "Justice was why you fought," he said softly. "For me, it's why I stand up." They sat like that for a long time. 2 generations of warriors, one old, one new, in the silence of the sunset. The cicadas began their evening hum, the wind carrying the scent of dust and dry grass. In that moment, Walter saw the soldier and the son he'd once feared losing. No words were needed. He knew Eli had made his decision. Night fell slowly. The dim yellow streetlights glowed through the window. As the 2 were cleaning up, a knock came at the door. Rosie stood on the porch, her face anxious, clutching her purse tightly. "I shouldn't be here," she said quietly. "But you need to know, they're trying to erase the video from the diner, both the security footage and the customers' phones." Eli stepped forward, his gaze making her pause. "Do you have a copy?" Rosie glanced around, then pulled a small USB drive from her jacket pocket. "I backed it up before they took the machine. I'm scared they'll make it all disappear." Eli took it, his large, rough hand brushing hers lightly, a touch not of verbal thanks but of someone who understood the value of courage. "Thank you, Rosie. You just saved my father from being forgotten," he said softly. She pursed her lips, tears rolling down her cheeks. "Mr. Grayson didn't deserve that," she said, her voice trembling. Walter gave a sad smile. "A soldier's used to it, girl, but now I've got a son stubborner than I ever was." Rosie looked at Eli, seeing not just the danger of a biker but the eyes of a man who'd known war and loss. As she left, Eli looked at the USB in his hand, his fingers tightening. Walter watched his son, his voice low but firm. "If you're going to do something, don't let anger lead you." Eli nodded slightly. "I'm not angry," he said, his voice steady and deep. "I just won't let them trample your honor." Outside, the night wind rustled through the streetlights, the chain on the porch creaking like a warning. Eli sat beside his father, his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the road. The next morning, sunlight slanted through the bare trees in front of the house as Eli started his Harley, its engine roaring through the empty street. Walter stood on the porch watching, his eyes a mix of worry and trust. "Just going to talk, Dad," Eli said, pulling on his leather gloves, then revving the engine, the bike pulling away, leaving a faint gray cloud of exhaust in the morning air. The police station sat in the town's center, a small building with a fluttering American flag and a faded sign. When Eli walked in, the hum of air conditioning and rustling papers stopped abruptly. 3 officers inside turned to look, their eyes cold and wary. He walked straight to the front desk, his voice low but clear. "I'm here for Rick Miller," the officer on duty, a middle-aged man with a paunch, squinted. "And who are you?" Eli pulled his veteran's ID from his wallet and set it on the counter. "Grayson, son of the man Miller attacked yesterday." The officer glanced at the ID, then looked up, smirking. "Oh, the biker? Hell's Angels, right? Heard you guys are good at stirring trouble." Eli didn't react, just stared straight. "I'm not here for trouble, I'm here for an apology." The officer sneered, tapping the counter lightly. "Apology. Your old man tripped. Coffee was probably too strong." Eli stood still for a second, then tilted his head, his voice dropping, heavy as steel. If he tripped, that fall had a fist shape. The room went quiet, the air taut as a wire. A door opened from the back, and Sheriff Duke Hollis appeared, tall, gray hair, his weathered face carrying eyes cold as ice. He sized Eli up, his voice even and dry. "We looked into it. No evidence of assault. Your father slipped. Witnesses confirmed." "What witnesses?" Eli asked, his gaze unblinking. "My people," Hollis replied, his smile thin as a razor. "Now go home, Grayson. You and your leather jacket buddies aren't welcome here." Eli didn't move. "I'm not leaving without an explanation." Hollis stepped closer, his voice lowering. "Free advice, don't make a mess. You can take your angel patch out of town before it brings trouble for you and your dad." In that moment, the 2 men locked eyes, one with legal authority, the other with moral conviction. Neither said another word until Hollis turned, signaling 2 officers to follow. One of them deliberately bumped Eli's shoulder as he passed, whispering, "Go back to California, biker." Eli clenched his fist but said nothing, turning to leave. Outside, the sun was high, illuminating Eureka's quiet streets, where everyone knew what happened but stayed silent. Avoided glances, curt greetings, doors closing as he passed. At a street corner, an old man smoking a cigarette shook his head. "You won't beat them." Eli stopped, looked at him, and said softly, "Don't need to win, just need the truth." That afternoon, Eli sat in Walter's garage, his Harley parked beside him, light streaming through the door's cracks onto his calm, resolute face. He opened his laptop, plugged in Rosie's USB, and watched the diner's footage. The image was grainy but clear, the punch, the blood, and his father's unyielding stare. Eli tightened the leather strap on his wrist, then opened his contacts, finding a name, April Monroe, a freelance journalist who'd investigated police brutality in California. The call lasted a few minutes, her voice firm. "I heard about your dad's case. Send me the video. I'll handle the rest." Eli sent the file without hesitation. When the upload finished, he leaned back against the wall, exhaling. Outside, the wind picked up, kicking up dust along the highway. He looked out at the road, seeing the town reflected in the glass, peaceful but rotten, quiet but full of fear. Hollis's words echoed, "Your father slipped." But Eli knew it wasn't just a punch to his father's face, it was a punch to justice. Night fell on Eureka with a heavy, suffocating silence. On the porch, Eli leaned against a wooden post, a half-burned cigarette between his fingers, its thin smoke dissolving in the cold wind. The dim yellow light from the living room spilled through the window, illuminating his face, sun-weathered, etched with lines from years and battlefields. Inside, Walter slept, his breathing steady but occasionally catching. Eli watched his father through the door, his heart heavy. The old man had once been his symbol of strength, the one who taught him about honor, discipline, and faith in justice. But now, the justice Walter had defended turned its back, leaving him humiliated by a man in its uniform. Eli stubbed out the cigarette, pulled his phone from his leather jacket, and found a familiar name. The line picked up after 2 rings, the gravelly, low voice of Darrell Bones. "Carter, an old friend and vice president of the Hells Angels California chapter. Been a while since I heard your voice, Grayson." Darrell said, a hint of surprise in his tone. Eli looked up at the starry sky, took a deep breath, and replied, I need help, Bones. Silence. For a few seconds, only the wind whistling through the receiver. What's up? Darrell asked. Eli didn't mention Miller or the punch, just said briefly. A veteran got disrespected. I can't let him stand alone. Another pause, then Darrell exhaled, the click of a Zippo lighter sounding. A veteran, huh? He said, his voice turning serious. So it's about honor. Eli nodded, his eyes on the long dark road ahead. Not about fighting, Bones. I don't want blood. I just want people to see that justice isn't something they can trample. On the other end, Darrell chuckled softly, the sound of a bike engine starting in the background. One word from you is enough. I'll talk to the boys. We'll hit the road at dawn, not to fight, but to stand by him. Eli pressed his lips together, his voice low. Thanks, brother, Darrell replied. No need for thanks. We fought for freedom once. Now we fight for respect. The call ended, but the sound of a Harley engine echoed in Eli's mind like a promise. He set the phone down, looked up at the night sky, the sparse stars flickering against the inky black. Far off, Highway 50 stretched like an iron ribbon into the darkness, the road he'd once called the land of free souls. Eli thought of the long rides, the brothers who'd fallen, the stories never retold. To him, the Hells Angels weren't about violence or rebellion but family, men with loyal hearts, living outside the law, but not outside morality. He knew that once they arrived, no one would dare disrespect his father again. The night wind grew stronger, carrying desert dust. Eli pulled up his collar, his eyes still on the highway, where the occasional yellow glow of a passing truck's lights flickered. Each light was a reminder that out there, the world ran by the law of the strong, and sometimes justice only came when someone was brave enough to take it back. He gave a faint smile, not of joy but of a man who'd lost faith long ago. From inside, Walter coughed softly, and Eli turned, his gaze softening. The old man was dreaming, perhaps of his younger days when justice was sacred. Eli silently vowed, I won't let them take that from you. As the clock ticked past midnight, he stood, crushing the last cigarette. The distant roar of a Harley echoed like an answer. His shadow stretched long across the porch's wooden floor, blending into the deep night. Before him was the thick darkness of forces hiding the truth, but in his heart a fire burned, quiet but unquenchable. Dawn broke over the Nevada desert, the sun's first rays piercing the barren mountain peaks, carrying a faint heat in the wind. The initial roar echoed from Highway 50, low, heavy like thunder reverberating through the earth. Then another and more, blending into a thick, resonant hum that filled the valley. Eureka's residents startled awake, pulling back curtains to peer at the main road. A line of Harley-Davidsons emerged from the west, the glint of chrome reflecting the sunlight, setting the air ablaze. Over 40 bikers rode in formation, their leather jackets emblazoned with flaming angel wings flapping in the morning breeze. The smell of gasoline, dust, and freedom fused into an unmistakable sound and scent. Hell's Angels had arrived. Eli led the pack, his face cold and composed, eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. His weathered black and silver Harley bore a small inscription on the gas tank. For honor. He said nothing, maintaining a steady pace until the group halted along the main street. The engines quieted, but their echo lingered, sending shivers through the onlookers lining the road. Small shops slammed their doors shut. Curtains were drawn, and a few residents peeked from behind windows. An old woman muttered, "More trouble's coming," while a young man whispered, "Is that really Hell's Angels?" No one in town had ever seen such a sight. A disciplined, silent, chillingly unified group of bikers appearing in broad daylight, orderly, without chaos or destruction. The police were urgently deployed. Several patrol cars lined the street, their red and blue lights flashing. In front of the police station, Sheriff Duke Hollis stood ready, his face hardening as Eli approached. "What do you think you're doing?" he said, his voice straining to stay calm. Eli stopped his bike, removed his glasses, his eyes sharp as a blade. "I'm here to submit evidence," he said, pulling a USB drive, the original video from Rosie's diner camera, from his leather jacket. "This is the truth, and I want to hear a public apology for my father." Hollis raised an eyebrow, giving a faint smirk. "You threatening me?" "No," Eli replied, his voice calm. "If I were threatening you, you wouldn't have time to ask." Behind him, dozens of bikers stood motionless, silent. They formed a neat line, their bikes perfectly aligned. Hell's Angels logos glinting in the sun like the emblem of a street army. Curious townsfolk began gathering at the street's end, whispering, filming, taking photos. The air was thick, so tense that the sound of a bird flying overhead was audible. A young officer stepped forward, shouting, "Disperse now. This is an unlawful gathering." Eli turned, raising a hand to signal his group to stay calm. "We're not doing anything wrong," he said, his voice carrying through the space. "We just want justice. No threats, no disruption, just the truth spoken out loud." Hollis tightened his hat strap, his eyes narrowing. "The truth is your father fell," he said, "and you're disturbing public order." Eli took a step closer, just enough to leave a hand's breadth between them. "I was in Iraq," he said softly. "I've seen men lie to cover up bad things. You've got the same look in your eyes, Hollis." The air froze. A few officers moved to step in, but Hollis raised a hand to stop them, realizing the situation was slipping out of his control. Social media had been buzzing since morning, with Rosie's old video resurfacing alongside rumors that Hell's Angels were coming for justice. Every phone camera in the crowd was now pointed at them. Hollis knew one wrong move would make his department a national headline. Eli handed the USB to a young officer nearby. "Keep it. It might cost you your job if you're honest, but it'll save your soul if you still know right from wrong," he said, his voice steady. Then turning to Hollis, "I'm not leaving until you tell the truth. Miller's punch, you know about it, and you covered it up. My father deserves an apology, in front of everyone." Hollis didn't respond, just stared at Eli for a long moment before turning and walking inside. The door closed. The bikers remained still. The desert wind blew through, carrying dust around the wheels. 1 minute, 2, then 5 passed. No one moved. When Hollis returned, he didn't look at Eli, only said dryly, "I'll forward the evidence to the DA's office, but I have nothing to say to you." Eli nodded, stepping back, not arguing. He mounted his bike and started the engine. Over 40 Harley engines roared to life in unison, the sound shaking the street. None of them shouted or raised fists. They let the engines speak, a sound of restrained fury, loyalty, and honor. As they rode off, dust rose, coating the steps of the police station. A child on a porch asked his mother, "Who are they?" She replied softly, her voice trembling, "They're people who don't let anyone trample what's right." In the distance, Eli glanced in his rearview mirror, seeing the American flag fluttering atop the station, then looked ahead at the open road. Highway 50 stretched out under his wheels, its roar echoing like an unspoken vow. Justice would no longer be the privilege of those in uniform. Just hours after the bikers left Eureka, social media exploded. April Monroe, the journalist Eli sent the original video to, posted the 3-minute clip showing Officer Rick Miller punching Walter Grayson in Rosie's diner. Her caption was brief: "A 90-year-old veteran assaulted by the very person tasked with protecting him. Is this our justice?" The video spread at a staggering pace. By morning, millions of shares flooded social media, with #Justice for Walter trending nationally. Major networks began covering it, from CNN to Fox News, all replaying the clip with the same headline, "Law Enforcement's Shame." Comments poured in, with Americans nationwide expressing outrage. Veterans from other states demanded Walter's honor be restored. Veterans organizations launched campaigns for a full investigation. One person wrote, "If a man who risked his life for this country isn't respected, who among us is safe?" The pressure mounted so fast that Nevada's state government couldn't ignore it. The governor's office issued an urgent statement, demanding an independent investigation and requiring Eureka's police department to fully cooperate. Reporters set up camp outside the station, dozens jostling to interview residents. Hollis stepped out, his face grim, sweat beading on his forehead. He'd never seen his quiet town become a national focal point. In a brief press conference, he read a prepared statement, his voice dry. "The Eureka Police Department does not tolerate misconduct. We are cooperating with investigators and will act if violations are found." When asked if he knew of Miller's actions, Hollis dodged, replying coldly, "He acted alone." But everyone saw the fear behind his forced calm. The press didn't leave, snapping every gesture, every word. Inside the station, chaos reigned. Miller was summoned for an internal review but didn't show. An officer reported seeing him pack his belongings that afternoon. His patrol car was gone. Hollis called repeatedly, but the phone only rang unanswered. By night, news helicopters circled Eureka's skies, their spotlights sweeping the neighborhoods. Residents gathered in the town square, holding signs against police brutality, some carrying old American flags, others with messages, "Respect those who fought for our freedom." At home, Walter sat in his rocking chair, watching news about himself on TV. He was silent, while Eli stood nearby, arms crossed, eyes like stone. He wasn't joyful or triumphant, only said softly, "The world's not quiet anymore." Eli replied quietly, "Justice can't stay buried forever, Dad." Meanwhile, Hollis held an emergency meeting with his deputies. "If Miller's caught, we cut him loose. He doesn't take anyone down with him," he said sharply. He acted alone. Got it. No orders, no cover-up. But the young officers exchanged glances, saying nothing. They knew the truth wasn't that simple. Some had witnessed the incident. Others had been pressured to file false reports. Now all were afraid, caught between loyalty to their boss and their conscience. When Hollis got the final report that Miller's car was found abandoned on the outskirts, door open, license plate removed, he knew things had spiraled beyond control. Miller had fled. In the dark, he'd left town via a back road to the highway, carrying his gun and a small backpack. No one knew where he was headed, only that before leaving, he'd stopped by Rosie's diner, where it all began. The diner's door was left ajar, salt and pepper shakers scattered on a table, and a photo of young Walter was torn in half. When police arrived, all that remained was the smell of cigarette smoke and a scrawled note on a napkin. "No one escapes." Miller's flight threw the station into disarray. Hollis called the state DA's office, his voice shaking. "We're pursuing the suspect." But deep down he knew the real threat wasn't Miller. It was the truth, growing louder every minute outside the station's walls, where the sounds of people, cameras, and demands for justice never stopped. That night, Eureka didn't sleep. News of Miller's escape spread. Reporters still camped outside the station, and townsfolk talked endlessly. In his dimly lit office, Sheriff Duke Hollis sat alone, a cold coffee mug on his desk, a half-burned cigarette trembling between his fingers. He knew everything was collapsing. His career, reputation, power, all burning away hourly under the light of truth. One thought consumed him: destroy the final evidence. "No video, no case," Hollis muttered, then picked up the phone, calling his two most loyal officers. "Tonight, Rosie's diner," he whispered, his voice dry. "Leave nothing." The order was short, final. Near midnight, a black pickup truck quietly parked in front of the small diner where it all started. The faded Rosie's Diner sign glowed faintly under the streetlight. Two men, gloved and wearing baseball caps, carried gas cans. One smirked. "This social media star's about to disappear." They pried open the door, splashed gasoline around the counter, and flames erupted as a match fell. Within seconds, fire engulfed the booths, smoke billowing thickly. But they didn't know that, down the street, a Harley's engine had roared to life. Eli, returning from a meeting with April, saw an unnatural glow in the sky, orange flames where the familiar road lay. He gunned the throttle, tires screeching, wind tearing at his ears. When he and a few bikers arrived, the diner was swallowed in flames. "Rosie's still inside," someone shouted. Without thinking, Eli charged through the glass door, smashing it with a tire iron from his bike, black smoke pouring out. He threw his jacket over his head and plunged into the inferno. Rosie's faint cries for help echoed. Eli found her in a corner, collapsed behind the cash register, coughing violently. He pulled her up, wrapped his jacket around her, and carried her out. The other bikers formed a line, passing buckets of water, using leather jackets and bandanas to fight the flames. Some were burned, hands scorched, but no one stopped. The street glowed, neighbors rushing out, standing frozen at the sight, men they'd called outlaws, risking their lives to save a small diner, to save a young woman. None used violence, none cursed, only the sharp rev of engines and the splash of water mixed with the fire's roar. After nearly 20 minutes, the last flames were extinguished. Rosie was carried out, coughing but conscious. Eli slumped onto the pavement, sweat and soot caking his face, hands bleeding from burns. Another biker offered him water. He shook his head, staring at the diner, now a charred wooden skeleton. The town fell silent, only the wind and ragged breathing audible. A boy from the crowd ran up, handing Eli a singed American flag he'd found on the ground. Eli took it, planting it in the scorched wall, the smoke-blackened flag still fluttering in the night. That moment, a local reporter raised a camera, capturing it all. The video aired the next morning, spreading nationwide. Its sole headline: "Outlaws, who saved a town's soul. Within hours, the image of bikers fighting flames barehanded became a symbol more viral than the original assault video. National papers wrote in unison, "When justice falls silent, honor speaks." Eureka's residents, from the elderly to the young, began to see them differently, not with fear, but with respect. Even those who'd once scorned them admitted they'd never seen such courage and unity. But across town, in the police station, Hollis watched the news on his screen, hands trembling. Every plan had failed. The fire didn't destroy the evidence. It fanned the flames of justice. "Impossible," he whispered, sweat dripping from his temples. The door burst open. A young officer rushing in. "Sir, they're sharing the diner rescue video. The whole country's praising them. People are calling for a full reinvestigation." Hollis slammed his fist on the desk, snarling, "I want Grayson arrested, now." Public disturbance, obstructing an investigation, anything. The officer hesitated. "But sir, he just saved someone's life." "I said arrest him," Hollis roared. In the darkness outside his window, the diner's embers reflected on his face, eyes filled with the panic of a man whose grip on power was melting like ash. Far off, Eli and his brothers sat by the roadside, watching the extinguished flames, their backs soaked, hands still burning. Rosie, wrapped in a blanket among them, eyes teary, asked, "Why'd you help me?" Eli replied hoarsely, voice rough from smoke, "Because you don't deserve to burn with their lies." He looked toward the distant red glow of the police station's lights, and in his gaze, an unspoken vow was etched deep. The next morning, Harley engines roared again, not just from Highway 50 but from across Nevada. Caravans poured into Eureka from every direction. Reno, Carson City, Sacramento, hundreds of bikers bearing Hells Angels, Mongols, Veterans Riders, and Rolling Thunder patches. All shared one cause: Ride for Respect. A journey to honor the disrespected veteran and the symbol of honor. News helicopters circled above, broadcasting live an unprecedented scene in the town's history. Along the main street, residents lined up, many waving American flags, others holding handwritten signs. Justice for Walter, respect the veterans, outlaws with honor. The engines thundered, shaking the ground, but no one felt fear anymore. Those who'd once locked their doors now stood on porches, hands raised in salute as the bikers passed. As the caravan reached the town square, noon sun blazed down, light glinting off polished gas tanks, setting the street ablaze in silver. In the center, Rosie helped Walter out, dressed in his veteran's jacket, seated on a wooden chair under the American flagpole. He looked at the strangers who'd come for him, his eyes wet but shining with a pride he never expected to witness in his lifetime. Eli led the group, stopping his bike at the town hall steps. He removed his helmet, dark sunglasses reflecting the thousands behind him. No microphone, no stage, but when he spoke, the square fell silent. "My father fought for this flag," Eli said, his voice deep, cutting through the wind. And a man in a police uniform punched that face. It wasn't just a punch to a veteran, it was a punch to this nation's honor. "We're not here for revenge. We're here to remind everyone that respect isn't a privilege, it's a right for every person." Behind him, applause erupted. Ordinary residents, old veterans, women, children, all clapped, their sound drowning out even the engines. April Monroe in the crowd live-streamed through her phone. The image of hundreds of bikers neatly lined around the square, American flags waving and residents chanting respect, spread across every social media platform. Within minutes, over 10 million watched live. National news channels halted regular programming to air the rally. At the town hall, police had formed a perimeter. Hollis stood behind the barricade, face pale, dozens of tense officers gripping batons. But they didn't face a riot, they faced the solemn silence of people standing for a cause. As Walter was helped to the square's center, thousands parted, forming a path, utterly silent. He stood slowly, taking a small American flag from Rosie, and raised it high. Without a word, the crowd removed their hats, bowing their heads. Hundreds of bikers revved their engines in unison, the sound thundering like a tribute. Hollis watched, his hand gripping his hat, sweat dripping. A young officer beside him whispered, "You can't stay silent anymore, sir. They're live streaming nationwide." Hollis glanced out, seeing April's camera aimed at him, joined by hundreds of others from national reporters. The country was watching. The world was waiting. He stepped forward, raising a hand. The officers lowered their batons. Hollis lifted his head, his voice trembling with strain. "Citizens of Eureka, and all those watching, I, Sheriff Duke Hollis, on behalf of the local police, apologize to Mr. Walter Grayson." A murmur rippled. Then the square erupted in cheers and applause. Hollis continued, his voice breaking. "Officer Rick Miller's actions were wrong. Mr. Grayson deserves respect. I bow in apology." He bowed, truly, under the harsh sun and thousands of eyes. That image beamed nationwide, a sheriff bowing to a veteran he'd dismissed, and to bikers society once called outlaws. April held her breath, capturing every second. Amid the cheers, Walter looked at Hollis, gave a slight nod, then turned to his son. Eli didn't smile or gloat. He placed a hand on his father's shoulder, whispering, "Justice isn't about winning. It's about the truth being spoken." A breeze swept through, the American flag fluttering atop the pole, reflecting the blazing sun. The bikers raised their hands in salute, engines roaring as one, a sound like the heartbeat of a community long stifled by fear and injustice. In that moment, there was no divide between police and civilians, bikers and citizens, only people witnessing a simple truth: justice cannot stay buried forever. But while the square still echoed with cheers, on the eastern edge of town, an old pickup truck quietly pulled up along the dirt road leading to Walter Grayson's house. The door swung open, and Rick Miller stepped out, his face gaunt, eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. The dim evening light cast shadows on the metal surface of the gun he gripped tightly. "You took everything from me, old man," he muttered, his voice hoarse. "They see you as a hero, and I'm the monster. Now I'm ending this." He walked through the darkness, dry leaves crunching underfoot as the wind blew. Inside, Walter was sorting old photos, unaware that evil hadn't yet let go. In the town center, Eli had just helped Rosie bring his father home after the ceremony when he got a frantic call from a neighbor, voice trembling. "Eli, it's him. Miller, he's heading toward your dad's house." Eli froze, the wind seeming to stop. A second later, his Harley-Davidson roared to life, fierce and heavy like thunder. He sped down the main road, wind and dust whipping his face, the speedometer pushing past its limit, the engine's roar echoing through the night, startling the town. "Keep Dad inside, don't let him out," he shouted into the phone, but the line crackled with static. Meanwhile, Miller reached the porch, his eyes wild, hand tightening on the trigger. The door creaked open, and Walter stepped out, still in his veteran's jacket, unafraid, meeting him with a calm gaze. "You're not the first to point a gun at me, Rick," he said, his voice low and steady, "but you might be the last to make this mistake." Miller growled, "No, this time you won't get up." He raised the gun, his hand shaking with rage and fear combined. At that moment, the sharp roar of a Harley grew closer. Eli charged in like a storm, his headlight glaring onto the porch. Miller turned, blinking against the blinding light, and fired. The shot rang out, the bullet grazing Eli's shoulder, leaving a thin streak of blood. He didn't stop, leaping from the bike and tackling Miller to the ground. They grappled, the gun flying free, skidding under the porch steps. Miller thrashed, screaming wildly, but Eli was stronger, slamming his elbow into Miller's wrist, pinning him to the dirt. "Enough," Eli roared, breathing heavily. "You don't get to touch anyone anymore." Miller struggled, eyes full of hatred, but Eli didn't strike him. He held him down, hand gripping the torn police uniform collar, staring into him. A look from a man who chose justice over revenge. Sirens wailed in the distance, red and blue lights flashing across the road. State police arrived, surrounding the scene, guns drawn. "Let him go, Eli," a voice commanded. Eli released his grip, standing up, breathing hard, sweat and blood mixing on his shirt. Two officers rushed forward, cuffing Miller as he cursed hoarsely. "You all betrayed me," no one responded. Miller was dragged away, the flashing lights reflecting on his face, the face of a man consumed by his own hatred. As the police car drove off, Eli turned to see his father standing by the doorway, the yellow light from inside framing him. Walter looked at his son, his eyes a mix of pain and pride. He stepped down, his hand trembling but firm as he gripped Eli's shoulder, saying softly, "You did right. You held on to what I feared you'd lose." Eli dipped his head, silent. In the distance, the police sirens faded into the night, leaving a long stillness. The wind rustled through the porch, the small American flag out front, trembling. Walter looked at it, then at his son, his voice low and steady like a prayer. "Justice never comes from those with hate in their hearts. It comes from those who know when to stop after they've won." Eli nodded, his eyes flickering with fire, but no longer the fire of anger, a flame of faith preserved in the darkness of cowardice and lies. After that night, thick with gun smoke, Eureka was swept into an unprecedented media storm. News of Rick Miller's arrest spread across America, igniting outrage and demands for transparency. Within 48 hours, the state DA's office issued a formal statement. Miller and Sheriff Duke Hollis were charged with abuse of power, obstruction of justice, and evidence tampering. The FBI stepped in, launching a special investigation into the entire Eureka Police Department. They raided the station, sealing documents, seizing hard drives, case files, and surveillance cameras illegally disabled for months. The media dubbed it Nevada's necessary justice purge. Hollis was escorted from the station, his aged face betraying his collapse. Once the man in control of a small town, he now symbolized the decay of the system he represented. Meanwhile, Miller sat silent in his cell, face bruised, eyes empty. He had nothing left to say. All evidence, from the punch to the video to the arson, was on the federal prosecutor's desk. In the days that followed, Walter Grayson's name filled headlines as a symbol. But what captured attention most wasn't the trial. It was the biker community. Papers that once branded them a societal menace now wrote, "The outlaws reminded America of honor and loyalty." Images of hundreds of Harleys lined up in the square, American flags waving, became icons of unity and justice. Thousands of letters poured in from across the country from veterans, ordinary citizens, even retired officers apologizing to Walter for the silence of the uniform. Veterans organizations invited him as a guest of honor to Nevada's Veterans Day ceremony. On the day of the event, the sky was a deep blue, flags lining the stands. Crowds flocked to Carson City, some in biker jackets, others in old military uniforms. As Walter stepped onto the wooden platform, all sound seemed to stop. He looked out at the stands, where Eli stood in the back row, not in his Hell's Angels jacket, but a simple black shirt, his eyes quiet. Walter began, his voice low but resonant. "I fought for this country believing justice was sacred. For years I thought I was wrong, that the world was only power and fear. But then one day I realized justice doesn't live in buildings or uniforms. It lives in the hearts of those who dare to do right. My son and his friends reminded me that sometimes honor is found where society forgot to look." He paused, his voice catching amid thunderous applause. "Justice isn't punishment. It's being true to your own conscience," he concluded. Eyes toward the horizon where Eli stood. Eli bowed his head, silent, his hand clenched in his pocket. As the ceremony ended, reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward, camera flashes blinking. "Mr. Grayson, what do you say about becoming a symbol of justice? What do you think of people calling bikers heroes?" Eli gave a faint smile, walking away without answering. He circled to the back, where Walter stood with Rosie and a few veteran friends. Walter looked at his son, smiling gently. "I didn't know they were calling you a hero," he said softly. Eli replied, his voice rough, "None of us are heroes, Dad. We just couldn't stand by when wrong was done." Walter nodded, his eyes full of pride. As they left, the Harleys roared to life, engines thundering under Nevada's blue sky, no longer a sound of rebellion, but a song of restoration, where honor, faith, and justice finally returned, simple as the breath of freedom. A month later, with the trials over and Walter Grayson's name a national symbol, Eureka finally saw its first quiet morning after a storm-filled time. But it wasn't the peace of forgetting. It was the peace of pride. That day, the town square was adorned with American flags and red, white, and blue ribbons. Church bells rang out, blending with the sound of hundreds of Harley engines neatly parked along the streets. Those who once feared, who locked their doors as bikers passed, now stood on the roadside, holding small flags, smiling and waving. Nevada's sunlight gleamed on worn leather jackets, where Hell's Angels, veterans riders, and other group patches bore a single word, honor. In the square's center, Walter walked slowly to the wooden platform, Rosie supporting him, Eli a step behind, his face calm and proud. A large American flag waved against the deep blue sky, reflected in the eyes of those who'd seen justice trampled and now saw it restored by human hands. The commander of Nevada's veteran unit pinned a silver honor medal on Walter's chest, saluting him military style. The square erupted in applause, hundreds of bikers standing at attention, right hands over hearts, eyes on the flag. Engines revved in unison, a unique ritual only they understood, a wordless sound of reverence. Rosie stood below the platform, tears streaming as she saw Eli turn to her, giving a slight smile. She said nothing, only nodded, a nod from someone who knew every effort, every pain, every loss wasn't in vain. Around them, townsfolk shook hands with bikers for the first time, laughing, taking photos, sharing hugs. An old shopkeeper, who once shuttered his store when bikers came, stepped forward, gripping Eli's hand tightly. "You reminded us courage isn't fearlessness, it's standing up despite fear." Eli responded with a look and a smile. On the platform, Walter took the microphone, his voice trembling but clear. I don't need apologies. This town was once shrouded in darkness, but today, thanks to those people wearing angel patches, we've seen the light again. Justice doesn't come from courts, it comes from the heart, and Eureka's heart still beats." The crowd clapped, cheers blending with the desert wind. The American flag waved, light glinting off the metal on Walter's chest, shining like a promise that honor was restored. As the ceremony ended, the bikers started their engines, the roar mixing with the crowd's cheers, no longer a sound of fear but a song of pride. Rosie looked at Eli one last time, her smile mixed with tears. In that moment she knew, justice wasn't just punishment, it was the restoration of human faith. And today, amid the engines and Nevada's blazing sun, Eureka's heart had found itself again. The next morning the sun hadn't fully risen over the mountains, mist still clinging to the fields around Eureka, but from the distance came a low engine rumble, first one, then two, then dozens, until the valley echoed with the familiar roar of Harley-Davidsons. The townsfolk, now used to the sound, felt no fear. They opened doors, stepped onto porches, and stood silently watching the road to Walter Grayson's small house. Before the old gray-tiled house, hundreds of bikers gathered. They lined up neatly along the dirt road, bikes side by side, worn leather jackets, bearing flaming angel patches, glowing red in the early light. Rosie and a few residents brought coffee and pastries, but no one ate, no one spoke, waiting in silence like a preordained ritual. Walter stepped onto the porch, his gait slow but his back straight, silver hair gleaming in the faint light. On his chest, yesterday's medal shone, reflecting the sunrise like a small flame. He raised a hand in greeting, his voice hoarse. "I don't know what to say beyond thank you. You gave me what I thought I'd lost, respect." In response, Eli stepped forward, his leather jacket fluttering in the morning breeze. He said nothing, only signaled with his hand. Instantly, over 200 bikers revved their engines, the sound exploding, shaking the ground. The roar thundered like lightning, echoing across the valley, bouncing off distant cliffs, lingering as a colossal symphony of metal, wind, and loyalty. Walter stood still, tears welling, his shoulders trembling slightly. In his life, he'd heard thousands of gunshots, bombs, comrades falling, but never a sound so beautiful, a sound of respect, brotherhood, and undying loyalty. He turned to his son. Eli stood a few steps away, his eyes unguarded with emotion. As the engines quieted, he approached the porch, removing his old biker glove, black and faded from years of dust, the Hells Angels logo worn. He placed it on the weathered wooden railing, saying softly but clearly, "This is mine, but it belongs to you. It's a promise that wherever you are, you'll never be alone." Walter looked down, his aged, trembling hand touching the glove, his voice catching, "I feared you'd lose your way, but you showed me a path truer than any law." Eli smiled, saluting his father like a soldier. Then he turned to the caravan, raising his arm. The signal prompted hundreds of bikers to start their engines again, the sound now steady, powerful, like the heartbeat of a united collective. Residents along the road stood still, some crying, others saluting military style. Walter raised his hand to his forehead, returning the salute, slow, precise, carrying the weight of a soldier's life. Eli turned his bike, leading the group, hundreds of Harleys following, sunlight glinting off chrome like steel sparks. As the wheels rolled through the small street, dust rose, the dawn's light piercing through, creating blazing red beams. Walter stood on the porch, watching until the engines faded at the horizon. Rosie stepped beside him, saying softly, "They're gone, but this town will never forget them." Walter nodded, his eyes still fixed on the distance. "Justice rode with them, Rosie, and because of them, I know the world still has people who live for what's right." The morning breeze rustled, making the leather glove on the railing quiver, its faint sound like a final farewell. In Nevada's blazing dawn, the Harley caravan stretched like a river of metal toward the horizon, where freedom and honor became one, and where their engines would echo forever as the pulse of unyielding loyalty. A year later, spring returned to Eureka, bringing gentle sunlight and cool breezes through the distant mountains. On the main street, Rosie's diner was fully restored after the fire. The new sign kept the old font, with a small addition below, "Home of Honor." Inside, on the wall by the window, Rosie hung two framed photos in dark wood, one of Walter Grayson in his old military uniform, smiling kindly, and beside it, Eli in his Hells Angels jacket, standing by his Harley with a resolute gaze. Between them, Rosie hung the American flag, patched together from the scorched scraps of that fiery night. Each morning, as customers entered, she often told the story of the veteran father and biker son who made a town rediscover justice. People listened, some teary-eyed, others nodding softly, saying it wasn't just a town story, it was a lesson for the nation. Harleys still stopped by occasionally, parking neatly along the curb, their engines rattling the windows. Each time, Walter, now frailer, hair fully white, smiled. He sat by his usual window, black coffee in hand, eyes on the highway. "They're still riding," he told Rosie, his voice warm and slow. "As long as those wheels turn, honor lives." Rosie smiled, wiping a table, replying softly, "And so does justice." Eureka had changed. People no longer looked at bikers with fear but with respect. Children born after the incident heard the story in school, not as a shocking event but as a legend of honor, compassion, and faith. Each year on the anniversary, dozens of bikers returned, laying wreaths at Walter's house, then leaving in silence. No speeches, no slogans, just the lingering hum of engines, a song of free hearts. One summer morning, as dawn bathed the town, Rosie was opening the diner when a Harley's echo sounded from the distance, lingering before fading at the road's end. She looked up, a faint smile forming. Inside, Walter sat alone by the window, eyes half closed, face serene. He had passed in his sleep, quiet as the mornings he loved. On the table, his coffee still steamed faintly, beside the old biker glove Eli had left. When the news spread, hundreds of bikers from across the state returned to Eureka. They said nothing, only lined up around the small house, revving their engines for 60 seconds, as years before. The sound echoed through the valley, bouncing off cliffs, blending with the wind, a final farewell to a man who lived for what was right. A year later, Rosie's diner still opened each morning. On the wall, the American flag still waved. The two photos still smiled together, as if father and son never parted. When anyone asked about the story, Rosie only smiled, eyes shining. Sometimes justice doesn't wear a badge, it carries a heart that stands for what's right. Far off on Highway 50, Nevada's sun rose, casting golden light on the empty road. A Harley's hum echoed from the horizon, lingering, then fading into the wind. But in that vast space, something remained, the pulse of freedom, honor and faith, still alive on every mile of America's highways. If you love stories of loyalty, honor, and justice, please hit subscribe to not miss the next journey. Thank you for watching. See you in more stories full of heart and the roar of freedom.